been to a power meeting since March of 2020, I think, when everything shut down, and that was when we bought our pandemic farm. We weren't looking for a farm, but as things go, the world shut down, and I thought, I'm really tired of seeing all my neighbors when I go out to walk my dog. One thing led to another, and we bought this beautiful farm in Sherwood. So also, since I have been to Power in March 2020, I've died, literally, and I came back to life, which is good. So that's a story for another day because I only have 14 to 15 minutes, but I'll tell you that story another day. But I have had a lot of experience with connecting to my heart since my cardiac event last November. So the work that I do now, like Emily said, I help women clear out the limiting beliefs that are holding them back, the cultural stereotypes that are holding them back, because all too well, if you have been socialized as a woman, there have been messages, there still are messages, they're out in the ether of what we can and can't do. And so we grow up listening to these messages and we assimilate the messages, we parrot them back, and we just think they're the truth. And it's not until you go out to live your biggest dreams that you start to see those messages playing out and how they're holding you back. So one of the concepts that my coaching work has seemed to come back to again and again, and in my own life has come back to again and again, is self-trust. So as professionals, as entrepreneurs, how important it is to build trust with clients, to build trust with other people. But I would say it's even more important to build trust with yourself. So let's say I ask you to come up here and pour a glass of water. You probably feel pretty confident doing that, right? Like you've probably poured thousands of glasses of water throughout your life. It's really easy to be confident in things that we've done hundreds of thousands of times, right? That we feel like, that's kind of a no-brainer, I can go do that. But what if I ask you to come up here and talk about something you feel like you should know about, but maybe you don't? That would be a little bit harder, right? Where there's the potential to fail. There's a potential that somebody else in the room might know more than you. In fact, I had these thoughts when everyone was introducing themselves as a coach. I was like, oh, they already know what I'm going to talk about. I have to scrap the whole thing and start fresh. And then I was like, okay, human brain, thank you for that. But anyway, so if you came up here and spoke about something that you feel like you should know something about, what would be the self-talk going on in your head? Would it be something along the lines of, oh my gosh, everybody in the audience already knows this, I'm such an imposter. These are the thoughts that we as humans have, but especially as women, people socialized as women have. And it can be really hard for us to trust ourselves because we're taught not to. We're actually taught to look outside of ourselves for validation, for praise, for being a good girl, for getting it right? Looking at fashion magazines. I love fashion magazines. I grew up with fashion magazines. Did anybody read Sassy, by the way? That was good stuff. I missed that magazine. But looking at the headlines, it's like, how to know if he's into you. Not so much Sassy, but other magazines. How to know if he's into you. Is your hair right for the fall? Like all of these things where, why can't we just ask ourselves? But instead we're trained to look to everybody else. So, I want to go over 3 ways that I have used to help build self-trust and that I use with clients. But basically, let me back up a little bit and talk about what self-trust is. It's basically having your own back. So it's knowing that whatever happens in the world, in your life, whatever somebody says to you, yeah, I lose track of words sometimes. Whatever they say to you, you'll be okay. You'll have your own back. You don't beat yourself up about it. You're a human, you're doing your best. In fact, the 3 guidelines that I live by, that I love, show up, speak your truth, let it be messy. right? We never let it be messy. We're always like, oh my gosh, I have to control all of the things outside of myself. I have to control all of your facial expressions, right? I have to control like the conversation that we have. I have to control everything what everybody else does so that I can finally feel good about myself. No, that doesn't work, as you know. The only person you can control, like they teach you in kindergarten, is yourself. So, being able to trust yourself, let it be messy, know that you have your own back, really can make you unstoppable in the world. So the first tip to building self-trust is honoring commitments to yourself. So how many times have you told yourself, I'm gonna go to the gym after work today? And then something happened, somebody needed something. A friend needed you to help with something. And then you're like, yeah, my time is flexible. Somebody else needs something. That's because, again, as women, we're conditioned to put everybody else first. We're taught to put our needs last. But let's imagine that you have a friend that you've made a coffee date with. And that friend texts you at the very last minute and she's like, I'm really sorry, my boss needs help with this report. I'm not gonna make it to coffee. You probably would forgive her the first time. You'd be like, yeah, stuff happens. You set up another coffee date, same thing happens. I'm so sorry, my brother-in-law needs help moving. At that point, you're probably thinking, I don't know if I can trust you to show up for stuff anymore. And you might stop making plans with that person. Or maybe the third or the fourth time, right? Eventually, you probably would stop making plans with that person. But we do that to ourselves all of the time. And I'm guilty of this too. So we treat our time and our time for ourselves as expendable. It's like, yeah, I'll work on posting to social media for my business as long as a client doesn't need anything. Or I'll work on doing something for myself as long as somebody else doesn't need anything. And this is usually where my clients say, but that's the only thing I can control is my time for myself. But what I want you to be aware of is, what message are you sending to yourself every time you bail on yourself? You're eroding trust. Just like you would erode trust with a friend if you bailed on them every time. Your trust with yourself is super important. So let me back up a little bit. When you are struggling with self-trust, that looks like having a hard time making decisions, outsourcing your wisdom, outsourcing your power, so going along with what other people say, even though you disagree on the inside, not being able to live with your values, and having a hard time with relationships because you're the person who's like, not you personally, but you're the person who's like, yeah, I'll do whatever, that's fine, it's okay. But when you trust yourself, you are better able to make decisions. In your business, you feel like you are able to stick more to your North Star rather than doing what everybody else says you should do. And you're able to have stronger relationships because people know where you stand. And that's super important. So the first way to build self-trust, again, is honor commitments to yourself. So make and keep commitments to yourself. You can start with micro commitments. I'm a super fan of doing things in 1% increments. I still struggle with perfectionism. I know a lot of people say I'm a recovering perfectionist, but I'm not even recovering. Like, my brain is still in that pattern of, no, it has to be perfect. So I love the 1% increment, 1% change. So instead of thinking, oh my gosh, Amanda says that I have to do all of these things and honor these commitments to myself, I'm gonna load up my calendar, and then you fail, 1%. What's one thing that you could do this week? In fact, think of that right now. What's one thing you could do this week, either for yourself or your business, that would move the needle forward? It might be going to the gym. It might be going for a walk. It might be connecting with someone from here and having a coffee date. We get to do that in person now. Isn't that awesome? Mm-hmm. We don't have to, but we get to. So one thing, and then when that time comes up, honor it. Build trust with yourself. Okay? Second way to build trust with yourself Let's imagine a different friend this time. This friend's really mean to you. We're not doing a good job of picking friends in these examples. I'll be the first one bails on you all the time. This one's really mean to you. So this friend's super mean to you. You go and you tell her about your day, and she's like, why did you say that? That was dumb. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you didn't know the answer to that question. What is wrong with you? But that's how we talk to ourselves all the time, right? It's just this inner monologue that's always going. And the variations of the theme I found are, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, nobody loves you. Like, those are our brain's greatest hits, right? Like, they come out in different clothes, but they're always like, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, nobody likes you. The good news is we all have that. So that makes it better, I guess. These human brains, I'm telling you. So back to my second tip on how to build self-trust is have your own back. Refuse to beat yourself up. When I made a commitment to refuse to beat myself up, that changed my life. There was no more second guessing. There was no more being mean to myself after I thought I screwed something up. In fact, it's a much nicer place to be inside of my brain right now. I'll tell you that. It's more fun. But we have these inner critics that are always trying to keep us in line. And that makes a lot of sense because we have human brains, and human brains were designed to keep us alive. They've been doing it for a lot of years. They're really successful at it. They're really good at it because they go on repeat. They repeat these patterns over and over again. Unfortunately for us, those patterns were like, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, nobody likes you. But your brain, in its weirdo way, is just trying to keep you safe. That's what our inner critic is. A lot of you know this, is your brain. Once you contemplate stretching out and living the life that you really want to live, like think about the last thing that you were really, really excited about doing. And then you're like, oh, but it might not work. Or I might not have enough money. Or my family wouldn't approve. Basically, it's some variation of like, I'll die alone, broke, bankrupt. That's where our brain goes, right? And it doesn't take that many steps. It's like, I'm going to leave a solid job in education and become a life coach. Oh, dead, divorced, bankrupt, right? But having your own back can help with that. So thinking specifically about my business, when I first started my coaching business, consultation calls really stressed me out. So they would cause so much anxiety. I would think, oh my gosh, I really want to sign a new client. I really want to start working with this person. She sounds amazing. I hope I say the right thing, right? There's some pressure. And so I would go into the call feeling super anxious because I'm like, I'm going to screw it up. I'm going to say the wrong thing. I would go into the call super anxious. The prospective client would pick up on that, obviously. I wouldn't be fully present because I'd be thinking about what I was going to say next. And needless to say, the person didn't sign up for coaching. So what was happening though, then afterwards I would beat myself up. I would be like, oh, I'm never going to learn how to do consultation calls. Why are they so hard? It's always a struggle. I would be depressed. I would be miserable. But I wasn't depressed and miserable because the person didn't sign up for coaching, right? That can happen. People can say no. It wasn't because of that. It was because of how mean I was to myself afterwards. Like, we don't know how mean we are to ourselves until we start identifying it. I have clients write their thought patterns down, and then they're like, holy crap, I actually say that to myself all day? So when you actually start to observe your thoughts and start to recognize what your thoughts are, it can be big. So once I committed to not beating myself up, I became a lot less anxious on calls, right? Because I showed up, I spoke my truth, and I let it be messy. I didn't have to come up with the perfect message to get them to say yes. I could just be a human, and how much nicer is that? So, similar, the third tip that I have for building self-trust in your life and in your business, because the way our brains do one thing is the way our brains do everything. We don't have like business brain and regular brain. It's all, you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, you're gonna die alone. I'm dramatic, by the way. The third way to build self-trust in yourself and in your business is becoming failure-proof. So I'm not meaning that in this aggro, like, I'm failure-proof kind of way. It's more like immune to failure. It's not a big deal. Because guess what? Having a business means failing a lot. In fact, my husband is starting his own little side business. He grows microgreens and does sauerkraut and things like that, and he's super stoked on it. And I was talking about it with him the other day, and I was like, so what's your next step? What's your next step? And he's hemming and hawing, and he's like, oh, I don't know. And he goes, I think I'm just afraid to fail. And I was like, yeah, that's normal. That's called having a human brain. But what does that even mean, right? Like, how do you know you failed? And that's what holds us back so many times from doing what we want to do in our lives, is we're afraid to fail, right? I do so many amazing things in a really mediocre way, right? I ride horses, I surf, I rock climb, I own my own business. I sound like a badass, but I'm kind of average at all of it. And I'm okay with that. But my husband is like, oh, I can't move forward because I'm going to fail. But once we actually unpack that, I just totally lost my train of thought. That was not a fail. But you have to fail hundreds of thousands of times in order to be successful in business, right? Like every single biography of a business person will tell you that. Every single person who's made money in their business will tell you, oh yeah, I tried 800 things that didn't work first before I found the one thing that worked. But we're so socialized to avoid failure. I'm looking at you waiting for my 1 minute time. We're so socialized to avoid failure, right? Because in school, an F is really bad and you die. But in business, an F is really good because that means you learn something, right? You pitch something new, nobody signed up. Well, then you get to problem solve. Thank you. So, the 3 tips for becoming failure-proof. I get so excited talking about failure. I do have a podcast, by the way. It's called Is This All There Is? And I have an entire episode on failure-proofing yourself. But anyway, the 3 steps to building self-trust are make and keep commitments to yourself, honor commitments to yourself, refuse to beat yourself up, and develop a positive relationship with failure. In fact, make a list. I have a list of 100 fails that I'm going to try in my business, and I'm working through it, and once I do one, I cross it off. So, as you know, a new part of my business is equine-assisted life coaching. Basically, what that means is a life coaching session with a horse in the area, because horses are remarkably intuitive. They're so perceptive of our emotions, our thoughts, our way of being in the world. They're like 1,200-pound BS detectors. You cannot be somebody else when a horse is in the room. And so I am creating these programs, specifically how to build self-trust and confidence, using horses to help us get there faster.